What we have here is a very large beef brisket. This brisket weighs over 16 pounds. It's got a little bit of freezer burn down here on the end. It needs some trimming up, but I'm going to show you how I cook my brisket. There are a lot of brisket cooking videos out there. There are a lot of brisket recipes out there. There are a lot of barbecue people that'll tell you their way of cooking brisket is the best. I don't care. I've cooked mine the same way since the very first one, and they've always come out great. And that's just what I'm sticking with. I think people tend to overcomplicate them. They get nervous about brisket. You're spending well over $100 a lot of the time for a big hunk of meat, and you don't want it to go wrong, and you're usually serving a pretty big crowd with it. I don't know if I've gotten lucky, but since the very first one I did on a tiny little smoker came out great, I've never had a problem. You're going to hear people saying you got to cook it fat side down, fat side up, point towards the firebox, flat towards the firebox, depending on the type of smoker you have, what temperature to run at, how many hours it should be running at, what type of wood, what kind of rub to put on it. I'm just going to show you how I do it. I also tend to enjoy the choice briskets. A lot of people will do prime. I've done both, and I can always make the choice come out great. I've even used a couple of selects before that came out just fine. What you're really looking for is that marbling, and I know once you start to get down to the select, it doesn't seem like there's a lot in there, but choice is perfect. We'll get into this. I got to trim this sucker up. It's got a little bit, like I said, freezer burn on it. And it's got probably a good 2.5 pounds of fat that needs to come off it too. So we'll get going on this beautiful brisket. This brisket's been in the freezer for several months. It was wrapped in butcher paper, double wrapped in butcher paper, but it got broken open in the freezer, and I tried to seal it back up, but you can see the fat's gotten a little bit dark here in places, and there's freezer burn right down here. I'm going to cut most of that off. It's also got this weird kind of flap here on the flat, and it's so thin that that's just gonna burn how long this thing has to cook. So I'm going to start by cutting that flap right off. I'm going to square off this end, cut that bit of freezer burn off, and that looks pretty good actually. I'll probably leave most of that and cut down this side here and get some of this fat off here and down through here. You want to leave at least an inch on there. I went a little deep. Maybe not an inch, but this area is still a little bit thin making this point, but I'm going to leave it kind of how it is back here on this flat part. I'm just going to cut and trim another little bit of. I really do like to square off my flat end. All right. So I've got it trimmed up the way I want it. You're always going to have, again, there's so many opinions with brisket. And again, you can put a comment down there telling me that I'm doing it wrong. I don't care. This is the way I do it. It turns out great. If you want to do it my way, do it my way. If not, do it your own way or somebody else's. I trimmed off what I expected to get off this thing. It was just over 16 pounds total. And you can see right here, I've got about 3 pounds exactly of fat trimmed off that brisket. So next I'm gonna go ahead and put my rub on here and we'll get it ready for the smoker. So this is my rub right here, my brisket rub. It is a half a cup of kosher salt, a half a cup of coarse ground black pepper, a quarter cup of granulated garlic, and a quarter cup of coriander. I buy my coriander as seed. I toast it in a pan and then I grind it. And I probably don't need to take that extra step. I'm not sure if it's extra fresh. It's just one of my favorite things is the smell of coriander seeds warm in the grinder. Yeah, I know I'm kind of goofy, but I've been adding coriander to a lot of what I use. So I'm going to flip this over. We're going to do the bottom first. Nice even coating. I don't put a binder on like some people put mustard or hot sauce or something on as a binder for the rub. I have done it in the past on my briskets. I think they're better without the binder. I do use binders on my pork shoulders, and I use a combination of liquids actually for my pork shoulders. I've been sneezing from the pepper, is why I'm sniffing. Try and get every surface coated with the rub. That's what's gonna make that wonderful bark on here. Actually, I'm going to trim that off. A little extra flap here I'm going to cut off. I just noticed. That looks pretty darn good. And now we got to get our smoker ready. It's a rainy morning here, still dark out, about 40 degrees. Not bad, much warmer than we've had. I got the smoker here with oak up to 300 degrees. I'm going to put this is a reverse flow, but my firebox end still gets a little bit warmer than the other end, but they're all running right around 300 right now. So I'm going to put my point down this end. I'm going to put a probe in here and a probe in the flat end also. Hard to see. There we go. Probe in the point. Probe in the thick part of this flat back here. So it's obviously gotten a lot lighter out here. It's been on for about an hour and 15 minutes. We're running right around 260. I put it on at 300, and then it kind of, I like to keep it around between the 250 to 275 range. The flat is cooking very quickly. It's about 120 degrees already just after an hour. There is some concern for that's going to dry out, but my point is at 90. So when the point hits the 160, 165, we're going to wrap it in butcher paper, put it back on, and I'm going to put probably mostly just lump charcoal on, because not only is my oak wood pile getting low, but it doesn't take up any smoke once it's in the paper. So all I'd want to do is keep that heat up around that 250 to 275 range until we hit 199, and then I'll pull it off. So that's where we are, and I'll update you at wrapping time. So here we are. Brisket's at 165, and I'm going to go ahead and wrap it with butcher paper. I've got some particularly wide butcher paper here. You may have to use 2 sheets to wrap a brisket this large. So I'm going to make kind of like a, move this up a little bit, a pocket here. And you want it to be at least 3 or 4 times as long as what your brisket is wide. So we're going to wrap it up, like upward, and then fold our corners in. And then just move forward, flatten it out, and then we're going to go over, over, and then tuck this this nice package, nice and tight. Go back on the smoker. Again, I'm still doing mine fat side up. Throw some heat on, extra charcoal, and get this going up to about 199, 200, somewhere around there. So here we have our finished brisket. Better recap everything with it. We took it out of the freezer a couple days ago. It's a 16-pound brisket. I mentioned it had a little freezer burn down here on the flat. So I trimmed it up, trimmed about 3 pounds of scrap and fat off it, squared it up, and put the rub on there, pretty heavy. Fired up the smoker, got the smoker up to about 300, and put the brisket on. I was at 7:15 a.m. So I put the brisket on, the point facing my firebox. I put a probe in both the point and the flat. When the point reached 165 degrees, took it off, wrapped it in the butcher paper, and put it back on, and continued to run with mostly charcoal, just maintaining my temperature right between 250 and 260. Was after the initial 300 is where I kept it running. So I took it off at 3:15 p.m., so exactly 8 hours. It hit 198 in the point. Now that 195 to 202, 203 is supposed to be the magic area where everything's broken down in here, so you don't have any tough cartilage and connective tissue and things like that. So the best way to test that, because there's kind of, you can still be at like 196, 197, even 198, and it's still not quite there yet. I take my thermometer probe, which is the technique a lot of people use, and just push it through the meat. And if it goes in easy with very little resistance, it's like smooth, then you know you're done. And it was done at 198 after almost exactly 8 hours. I'm going to let this rest now, probably for a couple of hours. I'm going to leave it in the paper, then I'll show you how to cut it up. It's also okay to leave it for longer. I've done multiple briskets for events and parties, and they're done hours ahead of time. Sometimes I just want to have that leeway, that free time to get it done. I'll leave it right in the paper like this, and then I'll wrap a towel around it, an old towel, thick, and put it into a cooler. Close the cooler up. 4 or 5 hours later, cut it up. It's still hot enough to burn your hands. It's still good. And like I said, I'll show you how to cut it. It's basically two different muscles kind of stuck together with a layer. They're kind of on top of each other. And the grain runs in different directions, so you got to cut the flat and the point in a different direction. And we'll do that next. So here's our beautifully cooked brisket. I'm going to show you guys how to slice it now. I like to put my brisket with my flat on the right hand side and my point on the left. Because I'm right-handed, you may want to do it differently. The meat runs in two different directions, the grain of the meat, so I'm going to slice right across the flat like this, so it's perpendicular across the flat. And as you get further towards the end, where you're getting closer to the point, you'll start to see where the two pieces of meat kind of separate, and the grain will run in a different direction of the meat. So we're going to want to turn it once we get down to that point end in the other direction and slice it across the other way. This is really a beautiful brisket. It came out really nice. The dog's waiting there, and she definitely had her share. So this brisket weighed 13 pounds prior to cooking. So uncooked weight, we served 11 people with quite a bit of leftovers going home with people. So now, see, this is where the point where as the flat gets down to the point, I'm going to turn the point towards me and cut across the grain in the other direction. And then just kind of leave it laying there in the same direction, so the point and the flat are all sliced in the same direction, and cut them again in half just to make the pieces more manageable. Your point end is the more fatty end. When people ask, if you want your brisket fatty or lean, that's the difference. The point's got all that fat in there, and the flat tends to be a little more lean. So now make a cut down the middle, as I said, cut all the slices in half, and we're ready to serve. Perfect.